You're watching the YouTube version of the We Are Innovation podcast. Join us as we explore how innovation, new technologies, and human creativity improve our lives. The future is calling.
Hi, I'm Federico Fernández. Welcome to another episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Today, we have an exceptional episode. Firstly, because of our guest, Rodrigo Serrallonga, whom I'll introduce briefly. But before that, I want to announce that this episode kickstarts the collaboration recently signed between Access Partnership and We Are Innovations and Somos Innovación. This collaboration aims to jointly produce and promote thought leadership around cutting-edge technology and LATAM innovation excellence. The first instances of the collaboration will be seen on our podcast in English, the We Are Innovation podcast, and in our sister podcast in Spanish, Sí, el podcast de Somos Innovación. But there are more things in the pipeline that you'll find out soon. Before introducing Rodrigo, let me tell you briefly about Access Partnership. Access Partnership is the world's preeminent tech advisory firm. They've been helping leading tech companies navigate complex regulatory challenges and expand their products and services to new markets since 1999. During this time, they've also worked closely with governments to offer advice and creating policies and regulations as the landscape continues to change with new and emerging technologies. AP's mission is to ensure that everyone has access to transformative technologies while promoting fair competition and consumer choice. And now, finally, I will introduce today's conversation. Today, we will talk about AI developments in Latin America. And for that, I am accompanied by Rodrigo Serrallonga. Rodrigo is part of the Emerging Markets and Latin America team out of Access Partnership's Washington, D.C. office. Rodrigo holds an MSc in Foreign Service with a concentration in Science and Technology from Georgetown University and a BA in International Relations from Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Rodrigo, welcome to the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thank you very much, Federico, for inviting me, and happy to be here to discuss more about pressing tech issues with you.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you very much for your time. We know you're a busy gentleman, so we really appreciate that you're here with us, sharing this time with us. And my first question, I would like to start with a couple of questions that say, so we are all on the same ground, and particularly myself, who I am not an expert in topics that you deal with. So I wanted to ask you, for the intersection between privacy and artificial intelligence, particularly what are the main privacy concerns that arise with the increased use of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, no, I think you touched on a very important point. So to understand, there's been a lot of talk about AI, right? Everyone's talking about AI, particularly, with the rise of Chat GPT and these large language models that now we're able to, get pictures and be able to transcribe text and speech. And so since recently, but also before that, AI has become a very pressing issue on tech policy. And when you talk about AI, you also need to consider different aspects, right? And one of that is privacy. You rightly mentioned it. Why? Because AI works with data, right? Like the data that builds on these AI models. Companies and developers who use this data. What happens with the data when it's used, right? So, for example, when you put something into Chat GPT, what happens with the information that you store, right? Whether that was a question or whether that was something. So privacy comes in hand, and it's present in all of our daily lives, but especially when we talk about AI, right? And privacy, it's since recently, and with Europe with the GDPR and with legislation jurisdictions around the world enacting legislation to protect data of people, and also to ensure that what we write in the internet or what we post in the internet is secure. That has translated into AI. And so, as I mentioned, one of the main concerns when we talk about AI is that privacy, right? Like, what do we do with the data that's available? I would say that recently, as we start to talk about AI legislation, privacy has also become increasingly intertwined in these conversations, right? What can we do, for example, to prevent the biases that usually arise from the algorithms from AI? How do we protect that, and how do we ensure that whenever we're making any AI model, that the information that we receive is secured? How do we prevent that malign actors might hack these systems and steal the information? So privacy is definitely one of the main elements that we need to consider when we talk about AI. And this is also something that it's super important, because we cannot have AI legislation without like data protection and privacy legislation. I think it's super important that these two are in parallel design, and policymakers are designing these two or are considering privacy in the legislation that is being produced within AI.
Are there, besides legislation, regulation, are there any safeguards that are in place in order to protect user privacy? How are algorithms collecting this personal data? Are companies doing something on their own? How do you see that?
Yeah, so I think that's like a very big question when we talk about like how to develop AI models and systems as well that protect privacy and data, right? There's still that question, and I think that's kind of like the main question, like how's my information stored in these like LLMs, like large language models, or how my information is used after I insert it. And I think that's a question that a lot of companies are struggling to answer, especially since there's still not a very clear understanding of how these models work. And I think that's a main issue, because when we talk about AI, one of the main risks or main concerns is that there's a lack of understanding of how like these systems work. And it's natural, because we've only seen how generative AI systems and how like these conversations have started, right? So for example, right now there's no legislation that protects privacy within AI, right? Just because it's something very new, and something that has just arrived recently. But at the same time, I think that companies, for example, can ensure that the data is protected, that when people are using these systems, that the information, it's either stored or removed, and kind of like following all the data protection principles, right? Like the protection for anonymity, protecting or giving data subjects the right to either get their data removed or get the data rectified. I think these are the things that we are starting to discuss, and that's why I mentioned that it's very important to always, or as we start to build these frameworks and regulations and legislation, that we always consider privacy and data protection when we're talking about AI. Because yes, oftentimes AI models are trained with data that is not inclusive, and this leads to algorithmic biases, and this leads to a lack of transparency in the way that these AI systems make work. And so we need to ensure that whenever we're talking about these systems, whenever we're talking about also regulation, that we do consider privacy, because if not, then we're just kind of like starting we're opening a Pandora box where there's not really, we don't know how companies are doing it. And I think recently, like companies like Microsoft, Google, like Meta are working to make sure that, AI builds like this trust and safety. And along this trust and safety, framework, the privacy framework is also considered, or is also incorporated into the.
Last general question. Researching for this episode and our talk, I found several times a concept that if you could, I would really like if you could explain us of data anonymization. And in certain papers and in certain material I read online, it's mentioned as an effective way to ensure user privacy. Could you give us an explanation and how do you see that?
Yeah, no, and I think, yeah, you're right. So it's basically making sure that whenever a data subject, inserts data, and whenever you're, I don't know, like putting something on the internet, or when you're sharing something with a social media company, that at the end of the day, when they extract the data, whether that's like your profile and the trends, your patterns, that they're not being able to recognize who you are as a person, right? So, and I think that protects, especially when we're talking about, making sure that companies don't have exact information of individuals, because that, could lead to, privacy violations, and especially, when they're sending you targeting advertising on, or when they're third parties, when companies sell data to third parties, that they're not able to locate who you are, and that you as a person are not exposed to the different challenges that are there on the internet. So data anonymization has helped in this idea and in these efforts to make sure that user experience is protected online, and that users, whenever they are navigating the internet, or whenever they are interacting with digital platforms, that the data that these parties are able to extract from them, that at the end of the day, that it doesn't identify who you are, right? Because then we get like into challenges such as, for example, targeting people, and especially in autocratic governments, when you're saying something, or when you identify with a sexual orientation, and then you have, these information may be used against you, right? Especially also protecting journalists who are, talking about, sensitive issues, promoting human rights. So I think at the end of the day, it's a good way to help data subjects, especially as we all navigate the internet, to be safe online.
Now let's switch to what's going on in Latin America specifically. You've recently written about an inquiry on Chat GPT in Colombia. The article touches on the possibility of developers having to adjust their operation modes in each country to comply with local legislation. How feasible is it for companies to adapt to a multitude of regulatory frameworks across different countries?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think, let me just take a step back, in terms of what's going on in Latin America. I mean, AI has definitely touched upon everyone's lives. And in Latin America, specifically, we've seen how, AI has become very popular. It's testing the waters in LATAM. There's been an increased use of generative AI in Latin America, which means like, the tools that can produce writing, music, and answer questions. And as you mentioned, like Chat GPT. And so, for example, by April 2023, more than million Chat GPT users were from Latin American countries. So this speaks to the volume and to how AI has become entrenched into Latin American society, and how people, in Latin America are talking about AI. Now, given this, now talking about, what are policymakers doing, and whether it's possible to make, a unified regulation, or how do countries tackle this issue. I think that given or since ChatGPT, policymakers around the world, become more interested, or woke up to the challenges posed by, AI, right? Making sure that, the risks that may arise with this new technology. And so, for example, just as kind of going from the global context to the regional context, it's important to understand what's going on in the global discussions, right? And we have, the European Union drafting its AI Act, this summer, and introducing the AI Act. We also have the G7 launching this new Hiroshima AI process, which is a forum devoted to harmonizing AI governance. And we also have the United Nations and the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, calling for establishing a global AI regulatory watchdog. So these kinds of conversations, global conversations, are trickling down to Latin America. And we're seeing, for example, how in Colombia, as you pointed out, judges are using ChatGPT to rule or make rulings. Or we are seeing how in Mexico and in Peru, legislators are using ChatGPT to draft legislation. And so, these conversations and the use of these tools, especially generative AI tools, have sparked interest in watchdogs, right? How do we protect consumers? How do we make sure that protections and privacy protections are respected? And that's the reason why, for example, in Colombia and in Brazil recently, the regulators launched an inquiry into possible violations or data protection violations of ChatGPT. So there is definitely, conversations that have been started to go on. I would say that, and this is a very interesting point that I wanna take from the Economic Commissions of Latin America recently, and the Caribbean recently published AI Index. So the ECLAC, or CEPAL, also known as the Spanish, recently published an AI index, and basically mapping and showing the AI ecosystem in Latin America. And it does a great job in talking about the different levers that have been used to promote AI. How digital infrastructure, data infrastructure, talent development, it's important to develop these AI. But one of the and also they talk about research, adopting and developing AI technology. But I think one of the main findings of the report is the governance, right? How to make sure, or how are governments responding, and jurisdictions across the region responding to this. And one of the main takeaways is that not just everyone's talking about AI, but also countries in Latin America are doing different things around AI, and each country is in a different level of progress within AI, right? We have the trendsetters, we have Brazil, we have Chile, we have Mexico, who are setting the trends in terms of what to do with AI. But we also cannot forget smaller countries like the Dominican Republic, or Ecuador, or Uruguay. So whenever we're talking about what to do and whether Latin America can do these types of how to better governments can tackle the regional issue of AI, I think it's important to understand that there's a diverse group of countries doing different stuff, and some countries are ranking better in terms of developing and promoting digital skills. Others are doing better in terms of ensuring that there's a stable business environment for the private sector to invest in AI. So my take is that their conversations are starting to take place. Now, the problem here is that, it's great that governments are talking about legislation, but I think by the time that we, enact some type of legislation or anything, like AI is gonna, evolve. So I think if I would make a recommendation, it's like, yeah, we need to start like, thinking about how to tackle this problem or this opportunity of AI, but also the challenges that this new technology poses. And again, this leads to different authorities, like the consumer protection, the privacy watchdogs, talking about like, okay, this is something new, but there's still no regulation, about it. So I think that's like kind of like that's the dichotomy. There's efforts, or the regulators are trying to respond to the challenges that AI may pose, or generative AI tools may pose, but at the same time, there's no established guidelines and norms to guide how these. So I think it's super important that governments start this, not only at a national level, but at a regional and multilateral level. Because if Latin America does not get involved in these conversations, then it's going to be very hard for the governments across the region to either become trendsetters or become leaders, but also to catch up to these new technologies.
Is Peru perhaps a country that is doing something of significance, something that can make Peru one of the leading countries in terms of AI legislation?
So Peru is making significant progress in terms of governance and setting forth initiatives and legislation that will enable the country to address the challenges and the opportunities that AI poses. And I want to also take what the ECLAC index revealed. And yes, Peru is one of the main countries that it has a national AI strategy. I think this is a very important aspect, that whenever we're talking about Latin America and whenever we're talking about how countries in the region can effectively implement and develop AI tools and strategies, Peru is one of the countries along Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, and Uruguay that have an current national AI strategy. And you mentioned the current or the latest legislation that Peru passed, which surprisingly became law very quickly. And this is something that I think this is a good signal that governments need to act quickly. The governments need to, or legislators need to discuss these issues. Of course, making sure that, discussions are thorough and that discussions are taken at the high level, but that these discussions need to take place right now. And yeah, so Peru recently passed, which is now it's law 31814, and basically this is a legislation that builds or seeks to build a regulatory framework that promotes the use of AI for the economic and social development of the country. And I think, going back a little bit, there's been conversations in Latin America, and most of legislation or bills around AI kind of like tend to either, focus on the social and economic development, how, to bring AI and how to harness the potential of AI for economic growth and for the social development of the country, but also on the ethical approach of AI. And Peru is taking more of like the social economic development, approach. And we see that in that legislation. And basically, this new legislation promotes, the development and use of AI. And one significant aspect is that it mentions, the protection and guarantee of human rights and, guaranteeing ethical, sustainable, transparent, and also the responsible use of AI. I think it's progress, but when we're evaluating the bill, or when we are looking at the law, there's still a lot to do, and the law does not kind of like encompass everything that we need to be talking about AI, which is fine. Like this is like one step which will build on different initiatives, but just to say that, just because one country, enacts a law on AI doesn't mean that, that will solve the problem, right? So I think that Peru, in terms of governance, is doing pretty good. It's faring very good. And I think one of the aspects that stands out in Peru is when we're talking about building legislation, we need to make sure that this is a multi-stakeholder approach, right? So it's not only the government who is like talking about legislation, or who are the ones, making comments, or giving input, but we also need to hear the voices of the private sector. We need to hear the voices of the civil society, the academia, to make sure that we are, whenever we're building a framework, that this framework encompasses the visions of different actors. And so, yeah, in terms of the vision and institutional framework, Peru is doing very good. We also have other countries that are doing better in terms of like global discussions, right? Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, which are, those are like the biggest countries in the region in terms of like, there are the G20 at the OECD, some of them, and they're also, participating in international fora. So I think Peru, in terms of like building its national AI framework and strategy, is doing good. It can do better, and making sure that Peru is like atop the global public debate is one of the main opportunities that the country has, and especially being one relatively smaller country than the rest of the trendsetters in the region. There's also being different like bills introduced in Peru in terms of like for law enforcement, or for healthcare, for education. So there's aspects of how Peru is doing in terms of like legislation.
Do you think the new legislation in Peru will affect investment in technologies like cloud computing or data centers? Do you think it could drive more foreign investment in these areas?
I think it aims to drive more investment, and I think it drives to, it seeks to drive more investment, and making sure that we're using technology for the social and economic development. And I think that's great. And maybe one of the setbacks of these new legislation it's that it doesn't necessarily talk much about like the ethical approach and how to make sure that we respond also to the challenges. AI is an opportunity, yes, but we also need to recognize the challenges. And I think in terms of like this specific legislation, it does promote the infrastructure investment, which I think it's a key whenever we're talking about AI in Latin America. I think one of the main challenges in Latin America is that we cannot fully have AI if we don't have connectivity, right? If we don't have people who are connected to the internet. And I think that's one of the main issues that we are now struggling, or we should be thinking about, making sure that we are connecting people and we're investing in AI, but at the same time in connectivity, in infrastructure. One of the main challenges as well, as you pointed out, cloud computing. Computing is also one of the components of AI models, and particularly here in Latin America, this is a structural weakness across the region, right? There's not much investment in cloud, or in migrating more to the cloud, and there's a lot of potential for this. But again, one of the main issues is that while there's been very good progress in terms of connecting people to the internet and making sure that internet penetration reaches and 70%, or people are connected, have internet connected devices up to 70%. Despite this progress in digitization, we still have other connectivity challenges. And if there's going to be investment and private sector is going to invest in the cloud, we also need to invest in this digital infrastructure to make sure that we're leveraging the potential of AI.
You gave us an interesting list. I'm sure it's not exhaustive, but of certain challenges that definitely the implementation of AI is facing in Latin America. What are the opportunities? How would you make the case for AI in Latin America?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely, there's a lot of potential to bring significant growth, benefits, and opportunity to Latin America in terms of AI. This comes in improvements in terms of healthcare, agriculture, education, sustainability, but also public services. I think one of the main or the recent discussions is how to digitize and how to make governments more digital, e-government. And in terms of education, how to make sure that we're building the talent, the future talent, right? How are we developing the talent that is going to be needed? We have a young population, right? There's a lot of potential in terms of like what are the skills that are going to be developed in the future. And Latin America has that potential, to build the digital skills. But we need investments, right? And we need governments to start realizing that if we want to be competing, or if we want to be leaders in terms of AI, that we need to invest more, and we need to open it more for the private sector, compared to the United States or Europe, like private, where AI, development is mainly driven by private sector investment. Here in Latin America, that is like significantly lower, right? So I think that's one of the main opportunities that, we need to talk to the private sector. We need to get the private sector involved. I think another opportunity is the infrastructure, building this infrastructure that we have, connecting the people. So we are ensuring that everyone has access to the internet, but also that through that internet we can power AI tools, and we can ensure that we are connected. So there's definitely a lot of potential for LATAM. I think there's also the potential to collaborate more in terms of like regional collaboration, right? We have countries enacting laws, but there's not much of a like regional conversation around AI, right? And I think in November there's going to be a summit on AI ethics that's going to be held in Chile, right? So I think these are the opportunities that we have to kind of like build a unified vision of like what AI means for the region, and how do we make sure that whenever we're implementing frameworks, that they are not just copy pasted from the US or from the EU, because the contexts are different, right? When AI and connectivity and like privacy and cybersecurity, it's different. It's transversal, but at the end of the day, that we as a region face different challenges that Europe faces, or that China faces. So we need to make sure that we foster regional collaboration to ensure that we promote a regional and Latin America vision of AI. And there's that potential, and to ensure that we are incorporating these levers into critical sectors for Latin America. That's like healthcare, that is education, that is sustainable agriculture, and how from that we can become a comparative advantage region, and show our comparative advantage vis-a-vis other regions in the world.
The future of regulation for AI, you see it like we will have like different blocks around the world, like maybe every country that it's under the European Union will have one, the US and maybe the UK will have something similar, Latin America. Do you see that will be the future, or do you think there will be some sort of possible unification?
I hope not. I hope that's not the case. I hope that we do have a global unified framework. Just because if we don't, I fear that there's going to be, countries that are going to be doing things that are not, respected in other frameworks, or that do not fall into like the principles or guidelines that, fall in one and another. And so we're going to have competing actors and competing, governments, trying to, oh no, this is what, raising their hand and be like, oh, this is the way we should do it, and this is the way we should do it. So whenever we're talking about like AI, regulation and like the global discussions around AI, I do think that it's very important that we invite everyone to the table, right? That we don't exclude anyone, because if we start excluding, like governments and that, we're not going to be able to fully to fully encompass the different challenges that AI poses, right? And yeah, here at Access Partnership, we have been thinking about like what global AI regulation should look like. And there's like three main elements. One is the globality of it. By its nature, AI is global, and so it cannot be constrained to one country or to one region or to one block of like similarly minded or like-minded countries. It needs to be responsive, right? So that it can change quickly, and it can be adapted to the challenges that this new technology poses. And it should be built on principles or ethics, that are able to provide guidance for those working on AI, and also enable some degree of self-regulation, that will bring, the different actors to the table, and we'll be able to talk about the different challenges as you pose, right? So the privacy, the cyber security challenges, but also the discrimination that may arise by these like algorithmic biases, and ensure the transparency of the AI systems and how this technology is built, right? Because as we think about technology in the future and the revolution, we need to ensure that technology is fair, equitable, and sustainable, right? Because if not, we're gonna like bridge more gap. We're gonna we're not being able to bridge the digital divide and that currently exists. So definitely membership in terms of whenever we're thinking about global AI regulation should be very flexible, and we need to act. It's definitely, I think that's kind of like the main challenge, that we need to act. Of course, this will not be easy, and bringing countries together to the table is always not easy. Everyone has their interests, and everyone is pushing for specific provisions that will help their country and their citizens. But I think at the end of the day, if we don't talk about this, and if we just give one country a blank check, being like, okay, you do whatever you want, then we're not going to be able to tackle the opportunities and the challenges that AI poses. So definitely AI regulation should be global. When discussions about AI regulation should be global, and they should be flexible in terms of like, who are we inviting? This has been a conversation, for example, and it's not easy, right? Like in November, the UK will be hosting an AI summit. And there's been a lot of discussion about like whether they're going to be inviting China or not. And we have countries such as the EU, or the United States, or the EU countries like being a little bit more skeptical of like inviting China. But at the end of the day, like if we don't invite other countries that sometimes are not like as likely minded, then we're not going to be able to ensure that AI is the frameworks that are around AI are built in a fair, transparent, ethical way.
Access Partnership is monitoring these issues all over Latin America and all around the globe, I'm sure, but we're talking about Latin America today. Sorry, this is just anything else you'd like to share that's going on in Latin America that we haven't talked about, that something important, something that comes to your mind now that says, oh, maybe Brazil is doing this, or Mexico. I know you could be talking about these issues, for 10 hours straight, just, a couple of clips of things that come to your mind that are going on now? By the way, we're taping this by the end of August. What's going on? What should our listeners, keep in mind that's going on right now in LATAM?
Yes. No, thank you so much for that. I think the region has been very active in terms of AI. We've seen, countries introducing bills. For example, Mexico, in terms of like the ethical approach of AI, how to ensure that AI is respected and encompassing that that ethical approach, right? Mexico recently launched a national alliance for AI, bringing a group of like different actors, civil society, academia, private sector to start talking about these, discuss AI regulation, and I think that's important. Then we have Brazil, who's like usually as I mentioned, the trendsetter, and also introducing like the Senate introduced an AI bill, and we're seeing like these discussions also, taking place, and the regulators in Brazil, the National Protection Data Authority, also being very very involved in these discussions, how to ensure that generative AI tools protect privacy and personal data of users. And that's why they recently also launched a Chat GPT inquiry. But we also have countries like Colombia, who recently also introduced initiatives to establish AI guidelines. And Argentina, for example, very very interestingly, published or introduced a bill that it's kind of like building on the ethical principles to address AI in the public sector. And this is also something that we need to talk about, right? It's not only like citizens, but also lawmakers, the public sector officials need to understand how this technology works, and making sure that these conversations are taking to the government side. This is something that is important. And these discussions, interestingly, are also taking place where data protection and cybersecurity legislation is also being discussed in the region, right? So we have Mexico recently introduced its cybersecurity bill. We have Chile also discussing a deep data protection and cybersecurity bill. So as going back to kind of like the first question that was asked, it's important that these governments build these other frameworks around cyber security, around privacy, to ensure that AI legislation, whenever they enact it, or whenever they build this framework, that it's comprehensive and that it actually is able to effectively tackle the challenges that the AI poses. So yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. We've seen more countries. I would say that if I need to rank one of the countries that's doing the best in terms of AI, it would be Chile. Chile is actually the one who had Chile introduced its national AI strategy in 2021. And it's currently also in discussions of updating its national AI strategy. Why? Because they recognize that the disruptions and that the recent changes in terms of AI need or require the government to rethink its AI policy. So we have that. Hopefully, more countries are start developing their national AI strategies. I think that's a very important aspect of it, and to make sure that the conversations are in a multi-stakeholder approach, right? So we have a lot of like civil society organizations, we have a lot of like private sector companies. Private sector companies, most of them are in favor of AI regulation, right? They're not against it, but they want to make sure that the governments are listening to them, to their concerns, to what they have to bring to the table. So I think in terms of that, the Latin American jurisdictions are doing a good job. Now, the challenge again remains of, yes, it's great that we're talking about AI, but let's not forget the other challenges that they're still in the region, like the connectivity challenge, and how to make sure that these conversations are parallel, and that we not only talk about AI, because if we only talk about AI, then we're not going to be able to, actually effectively implement it if we don't have connectivity. So that's my take, just kind of like ensure governments are doing great, but there's still like a lot of challenges. Or sorry, not doing great, but making significant progress in terms of AI legislation and regulation. But let's not forget the other challenges, which is connectivity, like ensuring that we have the digital infrastructure, and at the same time the talent development, ensuring that societies in Latin America have the digital skills. And I think that's one of the areas where a lot of countries are lacking. They're not policies that are promoting the building of digital skills. And if we don't have these digital skills, whether that's in AI, machine learning, deep learning, then we're not going to be able to effectively implement the AI ecosystem in the region.
The last question I want to ask you, Rodrigo, and again, really thank you very much for this conversation. I learned a lot. It's more philosophical, and I want to do a disclaimer. I mean, this is purely speculative, and it's just I want to know your take about this. We've been having a lot of conversations in our sister podcast and in other events that we have organized at We Are Innovation and Somos Innovación about AI, as you can imagine, because this is a very hot topic, really. And recently I interviewed Marc Riera from Spain, and he said something that I found quite interesting. He said that he sees AI for the next 5 years as co-pilot, but he also thinks that perhaps sooner than later we will face the decision. We will have to make a decision regarding whether we put AI fully in charge of certain areas. I want to know your take about this. If you think this is a scenario we will have to face, or how you see the future of AI. Sorry, it's a general question, but I really like, particularly with people who are experts in this topic, to try to speculate a little bit as well.
Yeah, no. My take, very simple, that AI should remain under human control. I think that's my short answer to it. Definitely, we're still going to be talking about AI, right? Like this is something that especially as this revolution is transforming, or this potential revolution is transforming, that AI will be hearing a lot of AI, and people will still be talking a lot about AI. Interestingly, enough as well, it's like how the perception of AI is being taken in different societies and with different actors, right? And so to respond to kind of like made me think, your question made me think of like, okay, what's the perception of AI? What are we thinking of AI, right? And I feel like there's depth in the media, and this is also something that the ECLAC index talked about. In the media, there's always this positive narrative of AI, right? Like, oh, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities for AI? But whenever we're talking about in social media conversations usually depict a more pessimistic view of AI, right? People are usually like more skeptical, are afraid of AI. They're talking about like how AI is going to impact the future workforce, or how AI is also impacting the education or the healthcare sectors. And so for me, I do think that these kind of like speaks to some extent of like what should we be doing, and what's the future of AI, what is it here to stay, and like what are we going to be talking about it in 5 years? And for me, yeah, definitely one of the main concerns is that, you know, that these machines take over. It's not that they are going to take over the world, but that we as humans lose that aspect of like the, you know, ensuring that technology is used to promote fair tech, right? Like equitable, fair and sustainable technology, right? And if we just leave everything to the machines or like these like systems, then, you know, we're not going to be able to ensure that. So for me, AI should remain under human control, and especially because of the risks that I mentioned that come with it, with AI, right? Ensuring that, you know, we're not increasing the existing and entrenched inequalities that currently exist in the world, right? Whether that's access to the internet, whether that is, you know, the connectivity, and ensuring that, you know, people, we're not increasing these inequalities. Also, the bias that currently exists in you know, in the algorithms, right? Like this is something that it's not new, and these algorithms, while they're super helpful, sometimes they or oftentimes they also engage in discriminatory practices. And so, you know, if we just leave everything to these algorithms and models, then we're not going to ensure that we are protecting, you know, people, and ensuring that their privacy and data protection, but also ensuring that there's not like discriminatory policies. And so there's definitely that. And also, I think one of the main concerns, a main concern is the complexity of these AI models, right? If we just leave everything to if individuals are not present in these discussions or are not the ones leading this, right now it's super like hard to understand what AI is and how this works. And can you imagine if, you know, like the technology is evolving there, we're not going to be able to understand, and there's not going to be like lawmakers are not going to be able to grasp the technical aspects or the policy aspects of these technologies. So it's going to be very impossible to regulate this, and it's gonna, in my opinion, it would get out of control. And I think the last is the diversity, ensuring that there's like diversity in terms of how we are promoting and using this technology, because oftentimes the teams that are developing these AI tools are not diverse enough. And if we just continue to do that, and if we just let the systems that are not diverse, were made by, you know, male Caucasians, like then of course those systems are going to, you know, be able to, they're going to continue to give us some biases and discriminatory policies. So the ensuring that there is diversity in building these systems, in developing these tools, is super important. And that's why I do think that AI should remain under human control.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. It was a pleasure to talking to you, and I hope we can do this again soon. For everyone who listened to this or watch on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. You can find us in any platform you use for podcasts, and as well in the Somos Innovación YouTube channel and We Are Innovation YouTube channel. And we'll meet again in another episode of the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thanks for watching this episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To know more about We Are Innovation, visit weareinnovation.global.